I'm going to teach you how to make absolutely incredible pan-seared salmon. It's going to have a beautiful crispy skin. The inside is not going to dry out. It's not going to take long to make, and I'm also going to teach you a few tips and tricks along the way to really make your fish taste phenomenal. Without ado, let's get started. Our ingredients list tonight is pretty simple. We've got a couple really beautiful cuts of wild caught salmon. Most of the research about salmon being a very healthy food was back when most of the salmon people ate was wild caught. And these days, most of the salmon people eat is farm raised. That's actually not what you want. And a lot of places don't want to redo the studies about the health of salmon because they know that when they do the studies with farm raised salmon, the results are going to be terrible because those salmon are fed tons of corn and soy. So if you want good salmon, buy wild caught salmon, and then ideally get it fresh. You'll get a better texture to it. There'll be less albumin, which is that white stuff that comes out on the edges that comes out. And the reason that comes out is twofold. One, because your salmon was frozen, the ice crystals in the protein structures kind of poked holes in the rest of the meat and allows that protein, which is what albumin is, it's a type of protein, allows it to seep out of the fish more readily. The other thing that can cause it is if you are just using too much heat on your fish, you're cooking it at too high of a temperature, and then it's going to bleed a lot of, or excrete a lot of albumin, and that's why you'll get that white stuff on the side. It doesn't affect the flavor. You can even just like scrape it off with the back of a knife or your spatula, and your fish will still be fine if you do get it. And there's nothing wrong with frozen, just for a better texture, fresh is ideal. You're also going to want either a few sprigs of fresh thyme or fresh rosemary. I've got some thyme here. A little bit of butter. This is a couple knobs of ghee that I made earlier this week, so I'm going to use that. I've got a nice wet salt here. It's a fleur de sel I'm going to use on the fish. Some fresh cracked black pepper. And then equipment-wise, you want some paper towels. You want a nice stainless steel or any heavy bottomed pan. And then one tool, actually two tools over here that are super useful. A fish spatula makes turning your fish over significantly easier. An instant read thermometer is going to make it easier to make sure you aren't overcooking your fish. And then a surprisingly valuable tool in this process is just a big old spoon. And we're going to use that later on for basting our salmon in our butter that has slightly roasted, in this case, our thyme. So those are all your ingredients. Get those out, make sure they're ready. And before we touch the salmon, just put a little bit of olive oil in the bottom of your heavy skillet and put that over high heat. What we're aiming for here is to have the oil to just be barely shimmering on the surface. If you look at it from an angle, you'll be able to see that happening. And so we want our oil to heat up a little bit while we pat our salmon dry. Okay, our oil is in the pan, and we need to make sure we pat our salmon dry. This is a really critical step to make sure you actually get a beautiful crispy skin on your salmon. And this process works for any skin-on fillet of a pretty firm body fish. So salmon, grouper are good examples of that. And you just want to pat it to get any excess moisture so when it hits the pan, it's not steaming. At the top on this guy, make sure you get your sides a little bit, and just have extra pieces of paper towel available for this. Then after you do that, these things are beautiful. You're going to want to season these pretty liberally. So some pepper. And more importantly, probably should even do this first, you want a good bit of salt on here. Just pat it in. Even on the skin side. So we're leaving the skin on, and yes, the skin is totally edible. It's actually a very big portion of the experience. We're going to go like that, throw a little salt on here. Pat that in. Most people do not give nearly enough salt rather than too much. So err on the side of too much salt because you probably just haven't been giving it enough most of the time. Okay, we're gonna leave those like that for just a moment while we wait for our pan to get up to shimmering. Okay, I literally just finished seasoning the salt or the fish over there and brought it over here. The pan is plenty hot. The oil is absolutely shimmering and there's even a little bit of smoke going on. I'm just gonna turn that fan on for a sec. So the heat's been on medium high. You now wanna drop it really low, almost to the lowest setting on your stove. Throw the pan back on and immediately place your fish in the pan. Be very gentle when you do this because there is hot oil. So what you do is you set it down and away so that when there's a splash, which will occur, it doesn't splash onto you, it splashes backwards onto the stove where no one's going to get burnt. So leave those on there. You can use your fish spatula or any kind of spatula really. Just press down a little bit for the first minute or so. And this is going to help increase the contact between the pan and the fish. Now we do skin side down because the layer of fish works its skin, fat, and the rest of the proteins. The fat is a really incredible insulator on this fish, not only when it's swimming in the frigid ocean in cold mountain runoff streams, but also in our cooking. So the majority of our cooking is going to happen with the skin side down, and that's actually one of the things that keeps this from overcooking very quickly. You'll see as we cook this, and you'll see as you cook this at home, that this won't get very hot very quickly with the skin side down. But as soon as you flip it over to the flesh side, this fish is going to cook extremely fast. So we do most of our cooking skin side down. And again, the heat's very, very low right now. Keep that really nice and low. This is going to take a few minutes. That's totally expected. Let it run really low. Let the fish do its thing. If your fish is hesitant at all to flip, if you push it on its side and it's still sticking to the pan and it's not easily releasing on its own without any extra effort, leave it. It's not ready to flip yet. So that's a really great trick for most proteins on your pans actually. A lot of folks will try to force their fish or their steaks or their chicken to flip because they think they need to flip it already. Your meat knows when it needs to flip and it will naturally release itself from the pan. So you can see I'm pushing on this. It's still attached. It's still holding on to the pan. Give it more time. Plus, skin side down, this is going to last a very long time before it gets too hot. I wanted to show you a quick example of what these look like part of the way through the process. We can kind of see how there's some cooking going up the sides here. The texture and the color is changing a bit on both of these. But here's what I was referring to before about whether or not it sticks. So this piece here slides freely when I just push it side to side. And if I lift it up, you can see it actually holds its shape fairly well because of how crispy the bottom is getting. This other piece here, if I give it a little bit of pressure, it's not giving. And the back's giving a little over here. So most of the skin over here has released. There's a little bit sticking to the pan on one side. And if I push it too much, what's actually going to happen is that the skin is going to tear off from the flesh. And that's not what we want. So this piece, because it's still skin side down, can last a lot longer here at this temp just fine. I'm going to wait until this bigger piece is ready and then flip them both at the same time and finish off our cooking. It's almost there because I can feel that some parts have released and some parts haven't quite released. So we're very, very close. We could even check what some of the internal temperatures look like. For a fish like this, we want the internal temp to be somewhere between 120 and 130. So let's see, this big guy, you can see near the top we're still in the 90s. We go down pretty close to the flesh there. At the very bottom, we're hitting 130. And as we come back up, the temp drops again. This little guy, so if we check a thin part on the edge here, so that's already 149. When I go basically right above the skin over here, the thick flesh at the top, we're still only at 116 or so. So that's great. What that means is when I flip this over, it's only going to be on the other side for moments. It's going to be super duper fast. It's only been a minute or so since that last little clip, and the fish are still nice and released. This one came released. There was one tiny little piece of the skin down here that had previously come off the flesh at the top. So I did scrape it a tiny bit. For the most part, it released all on its own. You can see how easily that moves around. So there's a couple really important steps that are happening right now, which make all the difference in your flavor because we've already locked in our crispy skin at this point. So here is where I'm going to grab. This is where you grab your butter, somewhere between 2 and 4 tablespoons. In this case, I've got some homemade ghee that I made last week sometime. For this, it all works the same. Then take those sprigs of fresh herbs that you've got. I've got thyme here. Rosemary also works. And throw that in your pan along with the butter. And what we're doing here is we're letting this butter melt. We're going to use our spoon. We're kind of pulling that thyme right into the butter. We're going to use our spoon to spoon it on top of our fish. So we're basically basting the fish in this butter. This adds a lot of flavor to your dish, and because your thyme is basically cooking in the butter as well, it's going to extract those flavors from the thyme, put it into the butter. So now that we've done that one time, we're going to flip our fish over and continue to baste and check our temperatures. So be very gentle as you flip your fish over. And I think my cat really wants some fish right now too, because he is meowing up a storm. So very gently flip this over, and you can see the crispiness that we've got going on, and the crispiness is only going to get better as we spoon more butter on top. So make sure your fish gets some good contact with your pan, and then just continue to baste. Again, ooh, hit my finger there. So be careful. When you're scooping down, it's really easy to snag your finger on the edge of your metal pan. Just don't do that. Just be careful. But know that the flavor here is going to be really phenomenal. You can also take some of this thyme and throw it right on top of your fish fillets at this point, and then as you spoon more butter on top, it's going to continue to help cook that thyme. And this is, again, this is super fast. So I'm going to check those internal temps right now. So this little guy, probably the thickest part of it, near the top, is already at 113. It's not going to take long to get up to 120, 130. This big guy, where I'm seeing 114. We check closer to the skin. We're a little over 130. So this is great. When you're checking, we're using a thermometer to check the temperature. Basically, you're aiming for the thickest part. But if you happen to run into a colder patch as you're doing it, that cold patch is your new baseline. So if you go to the thickest part, and the thickest part seems like it's done, but you happen to have also touched another part of whatever you're cooking, and that part is a lower temperature than your goal, you have to make sure that part also gets up to temp. Otherwise, that part just hasn't cooked enough. While these last little bits are coming up to temp, now's a great time to pull out at least one plate because these have to rest for a few minutes before we actually dig into them. So I'm just going to set this over here. And when these come up to temp, when they're done, you want to transfer them to another plate and let them rest for at least 5 minutes. And that 5 minutes allows the proteins to relax a little bit. It allows the moisture inside the fish to redistribute again. It keeps your fish from getting too dry, which will happen if you cut into it too soon. And it also helps make sure that all of the bacteria has been cooked off safely. Yeah, see, I'm back in. You saw how fast that was. The camera didn't get turned off. This tiny little fish fillet went from 113 to 160 in a matter of moments. So these are done. These are both completely done. Just very gently transfer these onto a plate. Let them sit for 5 minutes minimum to rest, redistribute their juices, let the proteins relax a little bit. That's how you make really absolutely beautiful salmon steaks. Here's a real quick shot of a close-up of our salmon fillets. They just came off the pan. This is still during their resting period. You get to see that beautiful crispy skin. You can see how the coloration has changed over here. You can see how there's a little bit of that white protein I talked about at the beginning, the albumin, but not very much because of the two things I talked about at the beginning. One, we used fresh caught salmon, so the frozen ice crystals didn't puncture as many of the protein cells that then allowed more albumin to leak out. Two, we cooked at a very low temperature the entire time. So that's how you reduce the amount of albumin coming out of your salmon as well. Here's a quick bonus piece of content for you. So we've still got some of the butter and a little bit of tiny bits of fish, albumin and other things that came off in our pan. Our salmon fillets just got set over here to rest. So once that's done, you can turn your heat up to probably medium-ish. Let this come up to heat again. And then we're going to make a really quick, super quick pan sauce, which is perfect for fish. So we're going to let this come up to temp. As it's coming up to temp, grab a little vessel that you can pour this into. So I'm just going to grab one of my favorite kitchen tools, a nice little ramekin. Place that back here, and all we're going to do is let this come up to temp, and then I'm going to squeeze some lemon into here. This is also really great for anytime you have bits of food stuck to the bottom of your pan. That is usually actually something you want to include in your food somehow, and you do it by what's called deglazing. And deglazing usually uses something with some acid to it, whether it's a lemon or some white wine vinegar or some white wine. So we can hear and see now things are bubbling, so we've probably got about the right temp. I'm going to add some lemon juice to this. Just get as much of that out as we can. And then stir this around. Just let this cook up a little bit. Let those lemon flavors kind of dull a little bit from the heat. And if you had food stuck to your pan right now, which can absolutely happen, especially with stainless steel, and that's one of the benefits of stainless steel. Food sticking is not a bad thing. It just means that food develops more flavor. You just need a way to get it off so you can appreciate that flavor. So our foaming is pretty much subsided here, except when I stir it. But you can see as soon as I stop stirring it, the foaming subsides quite a bit. Okay, that's about all we really needed. So what we got here is a lemon thyme butter sauce that's got a little bit of fish flavor to it already, because this is the same pan that we used for cooking our fish. And you just want to transfer that to another little vessel. And then when you serve up your fish, which will be any minute now since we're probably coming up on the 5-minute cool down, you can just pour a little bit of this sauce right on top of your fish right when you serve it.